Okay, we're good? Okay. Thank you, everybody, for bearing with us as we kind of handle the technical difficulties. If you guys are okay, we can begin. Thank you. Thank you all for coming today, and thank you for having me. My name is Raymond Boucher. I used to serve at the high school service years ago for about 15 years until they pushed me into early retirement. They told me we got to get younger, fresher blood in, and I sailed off. So now I've been asked to kind of come back and present a few things about our topic today, which is culture and communication. We're going to talk a little bit about culture, youth culture, Christian culture, church culture, what all that means. And then once we get a little bit of grasp on that, the different things that are affecting culture, we're going to talk in depth about different ways of communication, different methods of communication, and so on and so forth. The way I like to do things is we have lots of material to share. We'll try to get through that, and then we'll break out into sessions where we have a few case studies to speak to each other in small groups about the case studies, and you'll be able to share your thoughts on them. Try to give a practical light to the information that we've shared here. All this information is in the text that we're all going by, just trying to bring a bit of light and energy to it. That's all. To begin, if you don't mind, I'd like to just go around the room, just get your names and just a brief 1 or 2 lines about where you are, something about yourself. Are you currently serving, who you're serving with, and what are your goals and aspirations for this course, if you don't mind. And like I mentioned, I'm Raymond Boucher. I'm a father of 3, and I used to serve high school, and now I'm back here doing this presentation. You could start at the back. Yeah, here's the back. Do you have any service? Like, have you? Okay. All right. That's good. Thank you. That's great. Thank you. I know your brother, Daniel, right? Is he older than you or younger than? Okay. I thought your brother. It's proof. I thought your brother Sunday school when he was a little good grade niner. Anyway, yeah, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's good. Glad to have you on board. Go ahead. Okay. Okay. Sounds good. We're just going around the room, just sharing our name and a little bit about ourselves, if you don't mind. I know you just walked in. Okay, sounds good. Okay, great. Yes, that's great. Okay, okay, that's good. All right, great. That's Okay, that's great. Thank you for sharing. That's great, guys. Thank you. So let's dive right in, shall we? So again, it's a lot of this is outlined in your text. So the idea here is we'll be talking a lot about and understanding culture, okay, and Christianity. We're going to be talking a lot about today in the second half, postmodernism. It's a philosophical thought. It's a thought process that's really permeates Western culture. I'm using a lot of big words. It's not as complicated as it sounds. So we're going to really focus in that and dedicate the second half of today talking about that and what that means and how that's influenced everything. Okay. So it says here your screen is sharing. Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead and do your thing. You can share, yeah. That's good. All right, perfect. Um, we're going to talk again a lot about youth culture, how to speak with youth, and how to lead small groups. Okay. And this is a breakdown in syllabus. I've handed this in already. So today, as we discussed, we'll talk a lot about culture, Christian culture, and postmodernism. It's a very important topic, so we've dedicated a big chunk of time for that. So youth ministry is a cross-cultural ministry. And to give you an example, when I first started high school service, I was this really cool 21-year-old. I was hip with all the language of all the students. By the time, I was on my way out of service, I was totally out of scoop with all the lingo. And now I defer to my 12-year-old daughter for all the really cool lingo of the different things. I was really into it. So now I'm learning things like, what the word fit is, my fit is eating, things like that, that means nothing, to me now, but apparently it has a very deep meaning for this age group. And as we begin this unit in culture, we'll take some time and explore the basic principles of culture. So we're going to really go back to basics. What constitute culture? What does the word culture mean? How to break down what influences culture. So it's a bit intense here, just to get an idea of what when we use the word culture, what are we talking about? So describing culture. So for the purposes of this text, we're going to use 5 principles, or for the purposes of this course, I should say, 5 principles to talk about what or define what culture is. The first one is symbols. What symbols does the culture use? What do people spend their discretionary money on? What is prominently displayed in their homes? What is the prize of convenience and comfort? What is a symbol of status? Then we're going to talk about behaviors. What behavior is considered normal and what causes embarrassment and condemnation in a culture. As you know, different cultures have varying different behaviors. Like, a few years ago when I went to Egypt, the way they act is totally different. For example, men are allowed to engage with men, as they walk down the street very normally. When I get off the plane, it's the first person out. There isn't that culture where let's exit row by row. No, it's you get there out. That's totally acceptable in that culture. Um, then values. Values are what mark the transition between the outward and the inward. Values has to do with things such as how do people spend their time? What value do they put on human life and dignity? What is the role and the significance of family? So this, a little story, I still won't forget it to this day. My next door neighbor who happens to be of a different culture, he wanted to invite me to his grandson was just born, and he's having a big party. I couldn't make it to the party, so I decided to order a gift and send it to his house, thinking I'm being a good neighbor. So he gives me a call and he's like, "They told me that you sent a gift to my house. How dare you do this?" And he was very offended because I sent a gift and not go over and give it to myself. Upon second thought, I should have probably gone over to give it to myself. But maybe I'm growing up in the value of convenience, still doing something courteous to somebody else, but he values the personal touch, which is obviously something in our society that is being lost as we go through. So just the things to be aware of as you go through different cultures. Uh, they very different values are impact day-to-day life. And then beliefs. We go down to beliefs. So as you see the pattern, it goes from a bit of a superficial down to more deeper and deeper meanings. Beliefs deals with what is true. Okay, what is the belief system? What is considered to be right? What is considered to be wrong? What is the basis for determining morality and ethics? And those are the beliefs that contribute to a culture system. And finally, we have worldview. This is sort of the essential and the foundation element of what a culture begins. Okay, and that has to do with what is the intrinsic value of mankind? What is the meaning of life? Who is or what is God? This is the essential element that everything else is kind of derived from. So this is in your text here, and this really helps explain what I'm referring to. Okay, the worldview is what is real. From the worldview, you go on to the beliefs. It derives your beliefs. Based on your beliefs, the values are derived, and then finally, based on your values, behavior is derived. So that is sort of how you break down different cultures and how they sort of are created and how they're different and distinct. So to start off, just a little quick brainstorming activity. One of my favorite cultures is hip hop culture. I wanted to just maybe break down just for 5 minutes and let's discuss amongst your peers, if you can maybe break down in groups of 3 with the person right next to you. You don't have to really move. You just kind of turn your chairs and discuss the following. Please define the following for this culture: their symbols, their behavior, their values, their beliefs, and their worldview. So based on what we just talked about, can we talk about hip hop culture and how those things are manifested from what you know of it? You may not know all the answers, but from what you see in the media and what you see on TV and so on and so forth. So if we could just break down for about 5 minutes, have a little chit chat, and we'll share our ideas. Thank you. We'll wrap up in like 2 minutes. Yeah, if it's okay if we could just kind of gather. Anybody want to share some of their responses as a group? We can maybe go by really quickly, just share some ideas. Can we start with the back there? Oh, okay. Let blow my pointer. You can go ahead.
We usually take the mic, yeah, so people can hear online. All right, so the culture we looked at was like the social media culture. I feel this is the biggest thing right now, the social media, especially TikTok, for example. Um, so symbols, it's really interesting. People associate themselves with the symbol of a channel. Like every channel has its own logos. So like yeah, every channel has its own logo. So like this logo represents this channel with their following. It's like a tribe mentality at this point. Every channel has like different logos associated with it, and sometimes like invade each other, as in like they collaborate and they do things together. But like they have their own artists that people look up to online, especially younger adults, teenagers are still trying to discover their identities. They associate with these artists, and so they mimic their behaviors. They mimic how they cope with situations, or even like how they cope with other people in real life. Like for example, the artist could be more of like a nihilistic mentality. It's all about life where life has no meaning. They just play video games all day. They don't care. So their audience has the same mentality. It's just sort of that thing. So values that plays into it is like it's all about really like just finding pleasure and happiness and just having a community where you feel like you belong. That's because they're honestly those people just looking for a community. I feel like a lot of these people they're not finding a lot of meaning in their life. So when they find this community with that love like-minded individuals, whatever it could be, they just fit in and they stay in there and they become loyal to this community. It's like a community of loyalists to this one artist or maybe a couple artists. So beliefs, again, it's very secular. It can be nihilism. It can be like nihilism, so like as in like life has no meaning, or hedonism, we're just looking for pleasure, or sometimes even just humanism, where they feel like all the power to be happy is held within. It's not like they feel like they don't need God or they don't believe in God. It's just like um and the worldview is very materialistic. It's very like how much money can I make on TikTok? I want to also be like a creator of social media. It's all that matters to them. So yeah, very materialistic. It's also like modeling other people's behavior as well. I think there's also a lot of sexism as well in these social media cultures. There's a lot of like, for example, like something called being a simp. Whereas like, being a simp means like being like too much of a gentleman to women. So like you're trying to get them to like you, but you're trying too hard. All these little things, it's just like, so like they're saying pretty much like being a jerk is cool because then you're not a simp. Like, so it's that kind of culture. So like it's a very, yeah, it's very divided and that unified by this whole theme of materialism and just like, yeah. Yeah, it's very fragmented, yet it's all like unified under a single theme. It's just mostly just individualism. It's all about me, me, me. That's what it is. Yeah. Thank you very much for sharing. You would like to share their thoughts?
So for the hip hop culture, we said like when we think of symbols, we think of like the peace sign, the streetwear like low pants, do rags, gold chains. When we think of behavior, it's more like they're indifferent. They have the I don't care attitude. Their beliefs, we said like having what they believe to be swag or cool and they value money, fame, worldly pleasure, self-expression. So the world for you is that it's derived from Black, Latino, Caribbean culture, which is where it was originated, and that their behavior will be taken from what they see from those traditions, such as their dances, their dress, their normalization of violence, drugs, and cruelty against women.
That's analysis. Anybody
Okay, so we didn't go as deep as that. Uh, for symbols, we kind of said the same thing, like the like swag, the clothes, the jewelry that they usually have on. For behavior, we just said, just diss tracks. They just like to talk outwardly in rhythms and like very outspoken. Yeah. Values, just they're usually just always together, so just spending time together. They just value their own people and their friends within the same culture. Beliefs, we said the same thing, like being outspoken or having a bit of like a mob mentality where they're always agreeing to with each other, they're always together, they're always on the same page. That's pretty much it.
Very good. Thank you. Yeah, so these are all things that you got, obviously, no one here has studied hip hop culture in depth and history and all that, but this is what you deduce from what you see in the media, what you see on TV and so forth and so on and so forth. So some of the things that, if you go a bit more in depth, we all know about their symbols and their values, but some of their values are actually social justice, or how it initially started years ago. Social justice, peace, respect, community. It started, there's a lot of history involved, but it had other bases for where it started, and then it led eventually to kind of what you see now. And the worldview is actually anything that edifies the Black experience. So if you really talk to professors who studied Black culture or hip hop culture, that's one of the things that they'll talk about. But that's just some food for thought. Obviously, hip hop culture, it's a very small culture within North America. It's not a large culture. We're not studying a huge culture, but it's just an exercise for you to think through how breaking down a certain culture looks like. So let's move on. So at the core, as I had mentioned earlier, at the core of culture is basically the worldview. So what is the significance of the worldview? The significance is that it's largely subconscious. Okay, so a worldview is something that, as a young baby, you're born within your family unit, and you're born around this worldview that you just inherit from your family, and you think that's the way everything happens, and so it's more apparent to those outside looking in. So we talked about hip hop culture and what they feel or how they act, but it may not be so prevalent to them. If you tell them this is the way you look, he's like, but this is how we're taught to be. This is how we're supposed to act. And the centrality of worldview is that it's a person's expression of culture, okay, and it's what a person believes to be real and what is important and important. To change somebody's worldview is to go against the very culture, okay, in which the individual has been raised. So this is a huge shift for somebody to change their worldview about something. And obviously, worldview, since it is the most basic formative experience and in forming culture, it tends to deal with the nature of what is my relationship with God? Do I believe in a God? Do I believe in gods? What is God to me? So what are the ingredients of worldview? It consists of three things that are pretty intuitive. First, a people's understanding of the world. Okay, so what is my relationship to the world? What is my perception of the world? What is the nature of truth? What is the basis by which truth is determined? It's formed by the people's understanding of God, as we mentioned earlier, and people's understanding of self. So the world, God, and self. What is the value of man? What is man's purpose or woman's purpose in life? So on and so forth. What is the function of worldview? The function is that it provides meaning. This worldview provides meaning for your life. It provides a path for you to pursue. It provides comfort. The worldview makes things make sense around you. So this is how you ought to live. This makes sense to me, and therefore I'm comfortable within this parameters, within this structure. And security. These functions provide us with the reason why it is hard for people to alter their world view, to take, again, an existing worldview and deconstruct it in favor of another is a very big task, and it has to be done very gently and strategically. So when we serve young people, we got to realize that there's sometimes we got to know the background that they're coming from, and we got to realize that we might be challenging the culture they're coming from. most instances in our, if you're serving somebody within our culture, within our church, that is the case, but there are times where somebody's from another culture, we got to be aware of that. Or even we might think they're within our own culture, but they've grown up with a whole other host of beliefs or values that are totally different from yours. And I really like in this text, it uses the parable of the sower, and it really breaks it down how we can use the different, formations of culture can be used in helping somebody change their view on things. So, can somebody read this out loud for me? Can you guys see that? Can I get a volunteer? Go ahead.
A farmer went out to plant some seed. As he scattered it across his field, some seed fell on a footpath, where it was stepped on. The birds came and ate it. Other seed fell on shallow soil with undermined rock. The seed began to grow, but soon it withered and died for lack of rain. Other seed fell among thorns that shot up and choked out the tender blades. Still other seed fell on fertile soil. The seed grew and produced a crop 100 times as much as had been planted. When he had said this, he called out, "Anyone who is willing to hear should listen and understand."
Thank you very much. So the first seed, okay, the author here references it to symbols. So as we mentioned, the worldview, you go from the most superficial down to the most basic one. So in this situation, there might, when you talk about changing somebody, bringing them into our culture, you talk about the symbols. Okay, what symbols can they be adopting? Okay, so for example, they could, start holding a Bible or wearing a cross to kind of acquaint themselves with Christian culture, to acquaint themselves being part of the youth group. That's very nice. There's nothing wrong against that. But what happens is, because it is not consistent, they face being discarded or eaten by birds. Okay, so the idea is it's a superficial symbol. Okay, if we don't go to the root of things, it just becomes a symbol and goes away next week. They won't be wearing that cross next week. Then we talk about controlling behavior. And this can take two forms, positive and negative. Okay, the negative approach is to get the person to stop practicing behavior that's contrary to Christian culture. And the more positive approach is to get that person to embrace Christian behavior. Now, those are fine. However, it's outside behavior and not the heart. And so you run the risk, as was referenced in the Bible, where it falls on shallow soil. So it's just outward behavior. It's not really speaking to what the person is believing in the heart. So although it's nice to kind of change behavior and help people improve that way, it's not going to stick for the long period of time because it's not changing the heart. It withers and it's because of lack of moisture, as it says in the parable. The other way is by imposing our values. And as it is the variable, that is conformity to these values does not constitute conversion. So the idea is person coming into into Christian culture or converting into Christian culture, I first may be agreeable to these values. But again, if their worldview is not changed, if deep inside they're not changed, when they're faced with the challenges in the outside world, they're going to quickly be choked, as it says in the parable. And finally, as it says here, when the seed is planted on good ground, on ground that's going to accept the word of God, it will receive it and produce a crop 100 times. So we got to go straight to the worldview. We got to go straight to the heart of the person to change, their viewpoint about the church. So what is impacting the worldview? A change in worldview, first of all, occurs by the action of the Holy Spirit. Everything is done by the grace of the Holy Spirit. John 6:16-13 says, when the Spirit of the truth comes, he will guide you into all truth. And so we know we're always going to need that, obviously, help. And by exposing inconsistency. Jesus did this often. When they told him, it's not right for you to heal on the Sabbath, he said, which one of you would not pick up their sheep on the Sabbath if they fell and they needed their sheep. So by exposing inconsistencies is one way that you can expose somebody's worldview and bring them into our worldview. By role modeling a new worldview, and this is very, very powerful. This is one of the most, it's a simple one-liner, but in my experience in service, the number one thing, the number one impact you're going to have on your youth is being a role model to them. And it doesn't mean that it means you're perfect. It just means that you're there. It means having that relationship with them. You're going to teach them, or you're going to do Sunday school lessons, hundreds and hundreds of them. They're never going to remember that. What they're going to remember is going on an overnight trip with church, or a camping trip. I still have students who are in their mid-30s now who remember us going on a camping trip or going on other trips. And that has to do with role modeling. When you role model as a Christian servant, they're going to see that worldview in real life. And that's going to have the most profound impact on them. So if there's one take-home message that from my personal experience, that's not related to this text, that I'd like to share with you, and is going to come up again and again, is just being a role model to youth, being who you are, being a caring servant, is probably the most powerful thing that you can share with them. Now we're going to talk about, it's cut off at the top there, but it says Christian culture. Ooh, if we could just, that's okay. Anyway. So now we're going to talk about Christian culture. So the idea is we're going to talk about Christian culture and what that means. We're going to talk about kingdom culture as well, and then the worldly culture very briefly. Oh, is it? Okay. It's okay. We'll just keep going. So a few things. Let's see. It's all right. It's okay. We'll change it at the break. Oh, thank you very much. A few things to realize about Christian culture is that young people from strong Christian families, as obvious as as it might seem, no problem. Okay, thank you. Oh. Maybe, yeah, can you make the. Oh, perfect, thank you. Young people from strong Christian families are more likely to develop a stable faith than who are not. It makes some intuitive sense. Young people are more accepting of Christ than older people. Their worldview is more pliable, if you will. They're more likely to accept changing their viewpoint than older people. That makes some sense. Something to be aware of: young people from an unchurched background who are strongly converted to a Christian faith are frequently more radical and outspoken than those who have been approached their faith or been raised in the faith. And I've seen that myself. So something to keep in mind. And a lot of times when they're in that youth age and they're converting, they're really excited. They're very energetic. And sometimes that manifests in things that are not always very positive, but it's important to channel all that energy positively and be aware of it. So it's very important that as you're getting to know your youth, as you go outreach your youth, is to take a history in the sense of getting to know what the background of your youth is. If this person is new to your Sunday school class, maybe they just moved from a different city, just to get an idea of what their journey is. They could have been a very traditional background, very traditional journey, or they may not be. And I find a lot of times, when you outreach and you go to their house, those are big indicators to see how their house looks like in terms of, you'll get an idea of, what type of history or background they're coming from, to give you a better idea of how you're going to be able to serve that youth. So in this session, we want to break out the difference between Christian culture versus church culture. Okay, so it's important to realize that there is a bit of distinction in that. but at the heart of everything is kingdom culture. Okay, so we have kingdom culture, church culture, Christian culture. There's a lot of cultures here. Kingdom culture refers to the sort of the ideal standard, the culture, the heavenly culture that will never be adulterated or never be changed. It is the biblical culture that we talk about in the Bible and what Jesus talks about. Christian culture is basically how we live Christianity on earth, what Christianity looks like on earth. Church culture is depending on the church that you go to, and it can vary in that church between its traditions. So, kingdom culture, as we will read later on, okay, and we're going to really focus right now on kingdom culture. As you go across here, puts a less emphasis on symbols. Remember the 5 categories we spoke about cultures earlier on. And the growing importance goes up to worldview. Okay, so this is sort of the emphasis that kingdom culture puts on in each of these categories. Kingdom culture is Jesus. To learn about that, we use what the author here calls the Jesus Kingdom Manifesto. And basically, he refers to the Sermon on the Mount as where we get really a breakdown of what that means. And it's summed up with the Lord's Prayer. So the author uses the Lord's Prayer to really break down what is the main categories or components of the kingdom culture. God as Father. And this is very important. I know we take it for granted, but we know that God exists. There is only one God, it's not multiple gods. We have access to God. He is our Father. He's not some far off person. We have a personal relationship with him. This reminds me of my kids whenever they want to ask for something. It's not my child, but you know, we have access to our Father. We can ask him for something. We can have a personal relationship with him. That's an important factor. God is a ruler, you know, and an accurate kingdom worldview requires that we acknowledge God's role within the kingdom. He is the ruler of the kingdom. The kingdom belongs to him, and he has a plan for mankind. God is a provider. God is our judge. God is a deliverer. These are all things within the Lord's Prayer that base the formation of the worldview, which is the most central thing of kingdom culture. So again, right now we're defining what kingdom culture is and what are the values are. What are the beliefs? Kingdom beliefs. So we talked about the worldview. Now we're going to talk about beliefs. The author uses the Beatitudes, which we all know, about really breaking down what the beliefs are. It's a lot of text here, but I'm sure we're all familiar with the Beatitudes. To bless those who need for him. God blesses those who mourn. God blesses those who are gentle. God blesses those who are hungry, and so on and so forth. And so the summary is this. These qualities provide the grid of truth and morality by which we define our relationship with God. Dependency, vulnerability, humility, justice, mercy, purity, peaceable, and self-sacrifice. These are all, when you're talking about the kingdom culture, these are all the beliefs incorporated in it. He talks about the kingdom values in 3 dimensions. So now we're talking about kingdom culture and the values in 3 dimensions. He uses this verse about not being hypocritical as we pray. And so one of the values is concerning God and spirituality. Who we are is more important than who we really appear to be. Okay? And this is important when you're outreaching youth, because a lot of times our youth will get carried away with outwardly things. We all do. You know, even as adults, as mature people, we all do get carried away with the outwardly appearance. You know, they might run to be the first to dress as a deacon, but they could be cheating on a test, right? I'm not judging anybody, but I'm just saying it's important that we define things. It's the formation of the kingdom culture. These are our basic formative things that we're taught biblically. Values concerning others, charity. That's a very important value in the kingdom culture. Values concerning self, security. So we are taught that and he will give you all that you need from day to day if you live with him and make the kingdom your primary concern. It's a little reworded here, but basically, seek first the kingdom of God and all that will be given to you. The value here is that which is eternal is much more valuable than what is temporal. So to always be looking towards the kingdom of God and achieving that. Behavior, what is acceptable? And to talk about, he talks a lot about different things and references the Sermon on the Mount about what is acceptable from a Christian behavior standpoint. But some of the things that he really focuses on is salt and light and the importance of acceptable behavior. And the take home here is that behavior is not an end to itself, but it is a means. So the idea here is we're constantly, like, being Christian and being part of the kingdom culture, you have to constantly be, behaving in a Christian way. You have to constantly be the salt of the earth. It's not something you do to gain something. No, this is how we ought to be. And again, it goes back to, as a servant, you're constantly witnessing Christ to your youth all the time, all the time. We were told about the narrow gate, and so part of the behavior is life will be tough for us. We were told that things will be tough as Christians on this earth. So that is something that we want to keep in mind as well. Acceptable behavior in the kingdom is not about outward actions, but the inner state of the heart. So again, the idea is the heart is the foundation for Christian behavior, as opposed to outward behavior. And finally here, acceptable behavior in the kingdom is quite simply the obedience to his teaching. So part of the essential elements of behavior of the kingdom culture is being obedient to God's teaching and his commandments. Some of the symbols, as we saw in the graph earlier, symbols aren't a high priority in the kingdom culture because Jesus taught that the only symbols are really the ones in the heavenly kingdom that are important. So now we're briefly going to talk about the culture of the church. Important to note that the church is the visible representation of the kingdom of God. Okay? And so what do we know about the culture of the church? Very briefly here, we know that Acts 2, we know that they worshiped together, they met in homes. Okay, so we know there was groups of gathering where the early followers of Christ met together. We know that there's an order of service. We know there was a way to conduct themselves. St. Paul gave instructions on how to conduct yourself in church. And now we'll talk about the culture of Christianity, and this is the tricky part. So the thing here, we're going to talk about the process known as contextualization, and I'm going to skip right here to this diagram. It's very important to kind of visibly talk about this. You have the kingdom culture here, which is the gold standard, okay? And you have the world culture, which is where we live. You have the church culture and Christian culture, which kind of intersect. It's what brings the kingdom culture mixes with the world, okay? So that is sort of the idea. It's important to have these distinctions because we're going to be questioned by youth, okay? And we got to realize that the church culture can vary depending on what church you belong to, but Christian culture has a wider reaching arm. The kingdom culture is not always compatible with the world culture because it needs to be, because it's totally simple and it cannot be affected by it. More important, the kingdom culture needs to be quite separate and unhindered by the cultural norms of any society in order that it might be relevant to all. So this is a very important point. The kingdom culture has to remain this ideal standard, because wherever you are in the world, if you're looking at this culture, where you're looking at this biblical model of how to live, it can't be changed or affected by somewhere else in the world. If some other culture around the world decides they want to change something, well, the kingdom culture is still there. I'm gonna base my Christian livelihood based on what's biblically present and what's biblically unchanged. It's important that church culture constitute a part of a wider Christian culture, and it both reflects the wider Christian culture and is affected by it. Christian culture includes some aspects of church culture, are influenced by the culture of the world and even incorporates some by it. So what are some of the challenges here? The danger we face is when we expect new citizens of God to conform to cultural norms that might appear to be Christian, but on the fact they're just cultural expressions of the church. So something to be aware of. Like you hear of often missionaries when they go to Africa, and in our church we can't clap or we can't do other things. In some African churches, where where dancing or worshiping is part of church culture. It's not bad. That's just how they express themselves. So some things like that to keep in mind. Here, he brings an example of that when the early believers, when they talked about circumcision, and it was a big thing earlier on. And so St. Paul is telling them here is that circumcision is something that's cultural. It has nothing to do biblically. It's not something important for, not biblically, I should say, but Christ didn't ask for that. So this was a cultural thing. So their decision was basically on the pragmatic grounds. God obviously accepted the Gentiles regardless. God accepted everybody regardless of the decision for circumcision, and therefore the Jewish Christians had to kind of accept that. And then there's the challenge of conversance, which is another word for awareness. We have to be aware as we seek to reach young people living in the Western cultural world. We have to be able to aware what culture they are living in. We have to get to know their culture if we're going to work at converting them or getting them to accept the Christian culture. Two principles to keep in mind when we talk about the gospel of Christ and how we're contextualizing it and bringing it into practicality is that the message from the gospel transcends culture. Peter spoke these words after having received a vision, and it was very clear that the gospel was available to everybody, to Gentiles and to believers. So you want to keep that in mind. In every nation, he accepts those who fear him and do what is right. The gospel is for everybody. And it's also important that this is a very famous biblical verse. When I'm with the Jews, I become one of them so I can bring them to Christ. The presentation of the gospel incorporates culture. So that's very important, to be able to really use the gospel sometimes, to be able to bring your youth or attract your youth to things that are practical. Okay, so we finished this section and we have a case study. So I'm wondering if maybe probably need a bit of a break, a 10-minute break, and maybe we can come back and break down this case study together and go from there. Okay, so we'll do a 10-minute break. Thank you. Case study. Jacob, a high school student, found himself drawn to a group of peers who engaged in gossip and bullying as a means of social bonding. In an attempt to fit in and gain acceptance, he participated in harmful behaviors towards a fellow student. After hearing about this, you approach him after youth group and take the initiative to approach him on a one-on-one level. So using the kingdom culture worldview, characteristics discussed earlier, please provide a framework of how you would address the following scenario. So how would you address Jacob and his behavior? By supporting it with God is our Father, God is our ruler, God is our provider, judge, and deliverer. Okay, so how would you provide him feedback on his behavior is contrary to our kingdom worldview based on what we know biblically as God has these characteristics. So maybe we could break out into like 3 groups, the 4 back there, 3 and 3. You guys could discuss together and we can have some brief findings afterwards. Thank you. You guys have do you want me to bring the slide of, oh, sure. Oh, no, no problem. It's on the next slide, actually. Yeah. Sorry.
What you were asking?
Yeah, so it's on the, if you go to the next, if you go to the next slide, right after,
You have the slide.
like this one here. So using the, I don't, am I understanding what you're asking? Like what?
I want to work with the people online.
Oh, I see.
What are you asking?
Okay, so the question is actually on here. Using the kingdom characteristic discussed earlier, please provide a framework for how you would address the scenario, and then God as our Father, ruler. Yes. Somebody say, excuse me? Oh,
The second slide, so how do
Sure.
you answer?
yeah. So knowing that, basically, knowing these things about God, how did your behavior contradict those beliefs?
Oh, okay.
So how did you? Okay, we can gather it around and maybe we can share some of our findings together. So we'll start with this group over here since I will start at the back of the room. Maybe you guys could share some of your thoughts.
Do you want me to go through each?
Yes,
Oh,
please.
Okay, so we talked about how we would talk to this youth if we got as a father. We tell them you don't need this. You have a God. You have someone, like you have a different family. You don't need to be participating in something that's so gossipy and bullying and hurting others. For God as a ruler, we ask who set your like the boundaries here. Like this group is just setting boundaries where they can just cross over into people's personal lives and bully them. But God set these boundaries where you shouldn't be able to do that.
Very nice point.
Yeah, he's actively involved in, so you don't need to be around people that are gossiping and bullying. You can participate by asking for help. And then for God as provider ties into the ruler where he's like, God will provide you with the right people at the right time. You don't
Right.
need to go and take control of your social life that much that you have to join such bullying and gossiping groups. God as a judge, we said that we're accountable for what we do. So your gossiping and bullying hurts others, and you need to be responsible for it. And to maybe bring up the idea where if you treat others how you want to be treated, don't bully and gossip, and then not expect people to like bully and gossip about you. Like if that's what you do, you can happen to you. For God as a deliverer, we said that you may want to fit in, so you're tempted in joining a gossipy and bullying group, but God will deliver you from this temptation if you so choose to move against it and take action to not actively participate and not join them in.
Very nice. Very nice point, guys. Thank you.
I know, right? Yeah. We tried. Oh, okay. Yes, okay. Yes, I think.
So, so as the father, we would tell, like, from the father's perspective, we would tell, like, Jacob that we should not value things of the world, such as wanting to fit in, but rather to be set apart like Jesus, and say that Like he has always a support for him. So whatever happens at the end of the day, the father is always going to be with him. And then the ruler would tell him the law. In this case, the law is the Bible. So we would clearly say like God does not accept the Bible. I mean, God does not accept bullying, and that we should love our neighbor as ourselves. And then for provider, we would say like we would like provide Jacob with resources that can help him in this situation. And then for the judge is like he carries out like he says this, you are guilty basically, and what is gonna happen next? What's the verdict? Okay, what's gonna happen next? So in this case, we would tell him to like you did something wrong. So what are you gonna do to fix it? Like let's talk through it and see how are we gonna fix the situation. And then the deliverer, we would like bring him to someone that can help, like for confession.
Okay. So I mean, I think the idea is one of the things is Jacob looked to deliver himself out of the scenario by following in. We got to realize following others due to peer pressure might seem like your only response at that time or your only solution, but it's not. God is our deliverer. He has something else in store for us.
All right, so based from what I remember in the scenario is as someone is decided to join a group bullying another student because they wanted to feel acceptance and yeah, they wanted to have they're just trying to find their value. So God as a father, I feel like it really encompasses the rest of the 4 points as a ruler, provider, judge, and deliverer, because these are all like sub roles of a father was supposed to be. So being as a father to this student or this child, um, a father is not supposed to show any partiality. It's supposed to show unconditional love. So that's how we would approach this person. We're not supposed to judge him for any wrong he's doing. We're supposed to show them the same type of love as we would to the victim. So in that way, we provide them with complete acceptance and love, and a listening ear, someone that they can talk to about any issues they may be having that may be underlying their behavior, and in response, uh, we would judge them in effect, not to elevate ourselves above them or to put them down, but in a way judging righteously in a way that identifies the wrong behavior, why it's wrong, and how to correct it. And so in being a ruler, we provide ways to correct it, instructions. How do you correct this behavior? And why is it important to correct it? Because, for example, Jesus says to love thy neighbor as yourself. What you do to others, you also do to me. So it's an instruction for life, for righteous living. At the same time, it's also like a warning saying that you're straying off the path and this is where you need to go. And then delivering, by doing this, you actually deliver them from multitude of sins by correcting their path and lead them back on the path of Christ, being a model to them. You deliver them from a huge multitude of sins as if they did not have that guidance at all. And they kept going in this direction. And we could have, they went down the darker and darker path. So yeah, being a father encompasses everything at the same time.
Very nice. Very nice thoughts, guys. Thank you very much. Sure. Do I open the rooms? So some of the points that were shared here by Freddie's, I would ask them to whose approval they want and who can actually do something for them. It's a very good point. And I would also ask why they feel entitled to pick someone else apart. So very good point. And the idea is also he's taking matters into his own hands and treating others unfairly without any respect to that individual. So something to keep in mind as we are obviously constantly displaying Christ-like characteristics. Turn this off here. All right. Thank you very much, guys. So we're going to go on now to the next topic, which postmodernism. Okay, so all cultures have a worldview, and our focus today in this session is the worldview that permeates Western culture, and that is called postmodernism. Now, postmodernism doesn't really have a specific definition, believe it or not. It just means after modernism. And we're gonna go a little bit right now into how we got to this stage, how we went from pre-modernism to modernism to postmodernism. So there was 3 paradigm shifts. The first one is, as I mentioned, is pre-modernism, which included up to the 1500s. And it basically focused on the divine reality. Everything was biblically based. God and the church were the arbitrators of truth. Everything went through the church. Whatever the church said, whatever God said was the absolute truth. That was sort of the general consensus among societies of that time. And then what happened as between 1500 to 1960-ish or so is it's a large gap there of modernism, which is the age of scientific reality. So we go from the age of divine reality to the age of scientific reality in modernism. And then now we are in postmodernism, 1960 and beyond, which is the age of virtual reality. So that has another play on there. And the idea here is people believe there is no longer an ultimate source for truth and knowledge, neither in religion nor in science. Okay, as an individual in a socially, an individual is socially constructed by society. So the idea is here, your truths that you're experiencing are a construct of your society, of your culture, of where you're growing up. So your truths are going to be different than somebody else's truth in a different culture, and they're all the right truths. Everybody is entitled that way. So how did we go from the age of pre-modernism, where everything was divinely inspired, to the rise of modernism? You had the Renaissance, which is a time in European culture where there was a lot of classical art, architecture, literature. So you get the idea here that man started to think a little bit highly of themselves. They were starting to make some serious accomplishments. So you get that age of modernism where now maybe God doesn't have all the answers. Maybe man themselves can come up with the answer. You have the Protestant Reformation, okay, so that weakened the hold of really the church in general, especially Catholicism, which was really the major church in Western culture at the time, obviously. So the Reformation really weakened the hold and created a division in how you viewed the church, especially Catholicism, and in church and Christianity in general. The science and humanities, there were major advances. We all know, I shouldn't say we all know, you know, Galileo was the first to talk about the earth and combated the Catholic Church in terms of the shape of the earth. Newton's law of gravity basically shifted the idea that everything is put together by God, and Newton said there's gravity involved. Darwin, we all know about Darwin and the creation of the species, and so on and so forth. So a lot more science, a lot more research being published that gave alternative viewpoints, and it really weakened the hold, or weakened the concept that, you know, God and the Bible have all answers to everything. Overall, there was sort of this enlightenment, you know, based on Greek. So the age of enlightenment in Western culture was based on a lot of Greek philosophies, but the idea here is, whether scientific or theological, it was ultimately knowable. So the idea is we can attain all knowledge that we wanted. Everything we wanted to know, we can look it up. We can find it and therefore formulate our opinion. Okay? And so if you couldn't look up certain theological things, then therefore, you know, it wasn't true or it wasn't verifiable. And so the mantle of authority gradually went from God and placed upon man. Man was now able to determine what's true and what's not. We have the Industrial Revolution at that time. So, you know, the steam engine and factories. So as society grew, they started to fragment, okay, and move out to small towns and spread out from the core. And they believe that that influenced secularization. So in other words, as you created smaller communities, the communities got to talk, they got to come up with different ideas, and that kind of led to the idea of modernism, or the idea that God doesn't have all the answers, or the Bible or the church doesn't have all the answers to everything. And ironically, the response of the church was very hard in the way it responded to scientific research or scientific claims. They even jailed Galileo, for example. So the response of the church wasn't very positively looked at, and that enabled even more the downfall of overall Christian outlook on things and the rise of modernism and men. But then over time, modernism started to decline. So you have, during the world wars, progression, declined. Obviously, everything was put to a halt. Countries couldn't develop anymore because of the war. You had a loss of idealism. So, a lot of political turmoil. People weren't really confident in themselves anymore. You have the fall of communism, and then you had scientific uncertainty. So a lot of theories that we thought were true are no longer as true. Here it quotes Albert Einstein, for example. So all of a sudden we're like, oh, we thought we could figure everything out, but wait a minute, we can't. We can't figure everything out scientifically. So now what? Then you get modernism. So at the heart of postmodernism is the issue of truth. The modernists say truth is absolute, okay, regardless of your personal beliefs. The modernists believe there's a truth out there that we all can agree to. However, postmodernists believe that truth is relative, based on your personal opinion. Okay? The irony in postmodern thought is that they adopt their theories about relative truth as though they are absolute. So you understand the little irony in all of this is that they're firm in their belief that it's true, that not everybody has a true belief. Modernists view people as independent individuals who think for themselves, while postmoderns believe that see individualism and thought as a product of culture. So the idea is here, who you are, your beliefs, is a product of where you're living. We know that postmodernism affects language as well. So it has a great impact on your postmodernist view is greatly impacted by your culture. Postmodernism is also greatly impacted by language. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and do a little case study using an article about that. It's very important. What is the scope of postmodernism? First of all, obviously secularism. It affects your belief in God, our understanding of the world. B, it affects our spirituality, our understanding of God. And finally, selfism. It affects our understanding of self, how we define ourselves. And again, we're going to go into that a little bit deeper. And without the hope that comes from knowing God and without absolute truth, it's a little wonder why young people struggle to find a sense of meaning or satisfaction in life. So when you remove all these truths and everybody's out there to find their own truth, you could see how it could lead to a lot of lost people, a lot of lost youth, a lot of lost ideologies. So, and it really connects this with where postmodernist thought leaves and how the biblical way can get you back. There's an interplay with these. Secularism causes a loss of absolute truth, but loss of truth causes young people to lose their way and to lose hope. And in turn, this leads to a life that lacks satisfaction and further question for meaning and truth. We know that Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And again, the text has this wonderful little schematic here. A lot of truth, well, Jesus says, I am the truth. That leads to a lot of hope. A loss of hope leads to a loss of meaning. Well, Jesus says, I am the way. And then the loss of meaning leads to a loss of truth. Jesus says, I am the life. And what influence, on what does postmodernism have influence on? It has influence on education. So a lot of terminologies that's used in education, instead of rewarding people for being at the top of their class or being the best student or achieving high marks, different language is used. There's also teaching people to their level, as opposed to teaching it with what level they should be at. So it has had a huge impact on teaching. It has a huge impact on health and health techniques. As opposed to medicine always being right or the doctor being right, Now it's like, no, whatever works for me, how, whatever I feel is right, whatever my body feels is right. No, I'm not saying one is necessarily always right or always wrong. I'm not saying, but it's just the idea that it totally discredits the traditional way of thinking. In literature, the primary significance of a text is no longer what the writer intended. So the idea is when you go back to historical texts, that person is writing from whatever context they're in or whatever they believe at that time. It's not actually real history. It's not actually what happened. It's what they believed at that time. They're not actually documenting actual facts. And that leads to the second part about history. They're just interpreting the reality that they were in. It's just an interpretation. It's not an actual display of facts. They believe that law, is constantly unfair because it marginalizes society or it marginalizes certain underprivileged people. It affects psychology or in the treatment of psychology because it's based on the premise that what is reality for the client is actually real. It's not that the client is suffering with something or the patient is suffering with something. What they're going through is actually real. Language, political correctness, and we're all living in this now with the woke movement and different things. Political correctness is huge. And obviously religious belief. It's important to note that modernists didn't believe in religion, right? They were anti-religions. The postmodernist is going to say, that's fine, it's okay that you believe in religion. That's great. It's just somebody else can also believe that God doesn't exist, and that's fine as well. So postmodernism don't necessarily reject your viewpoint. They just don't think it's the one absolute right viewpoint. Their interpretation of the Bible is obviously it's a reader-centered. However the reader wants to interpret it is what the truth is for that person. Obviously, when you critique postmodernism, it represents an abandonment of God's way, because it takes the fact that the one sovereign God is the absolute truth. It takes that out of the whole equation, and now it's kind of open to everybody. And it has become an inner guide over which, with our cultural perception of reality, are sovereign. Postmodernism goes far, it advocates respect for everybody's culture. Okay? It's important, again, don't get that distinction confused. It respects all cultures, but again, there isn't that one right culture. So, kingdom culture, we're going to say this is the right culture. Obviously, it says good for you, you believe in that, but it's not the absolute truth. Okay, so that's a little a blurb on a description of postmodernism. I like the two case studies that we have here, because I feel that you'll find it's really applicable, and you're going to see how it's affecting the things that we're dealing with right now. So we have two case studies left that we will break out into groups like we did earlier, and then we'll kind of come back. So we'll do them one at a time, okay? Emily, a grade 12 high school student, finds herself facing a moral and ethical dilemma related to academic integrity. She is known as a diligent student with aspirations to attend a prestigious university, and she's currently enrolled in an advanced placement course that is particularly challenging. Emily has been struggling with her AP physics class due to the difficulty of the material and the pressure to maintain high marks for university admissions. One day, she discovers that the upcoming midterm exam has been left unattended on her teacher's desk. The teacher, momentarily called away, unintentionally leaves the room without securing the exam. Emily is torn between her desire to perform well in the class and the ethical implications of potentially exploiting the situation. Please break out in small groups and discuss why Emily may and can use elements of postmodernist thought to take advantage of her situation to justify potentially cheating on her exam. All right, so give you guys maybe 10 minutes. Thank you. more details in the next one. All right, maybe we'll start with the group in the back there and see if you guys could share some ideas of, yes, oh, Mike. Where did it go? No, thanks.
So when we spoke about this one, the way she can justify it is first of all, none of the answers were locked into somewhere like private that was like left there on the desk. So like I just like ran into them. So like one of the things you can say just like I didn't go through your stuff. You just left it there. Something that you did that you did. So just because it came across my way, I can get used. So this is one thing. Another thing we can talk about is the stress that Emily was going through is the fact that she was stressing about the grades and stressing about like how she can make it later to school. So like one of the things that we can also say is like because of all of this and because of all the stress, it just makes sense to me that I can just go and like since they came into me, just justify that it can relieve some of the stress that I'm going through. So really I can just like look through the things, and since it came across my way, I can just use it and leverage it to my favor.
Okay, so the idea is, what do I feel? What am I feeling? I'm feeling stressed, therefore I'm justified in doing what I want to do.
Okay, so we said that in terms of like understanding of God, we said Emily's gonna think God will forgive me, so it's okay. I'll just do it anyway and then ask for God's forgiveness after. And then understanding of the world. Emily's gonna think, oh, it's not as bad as what other people do. And it's for a good enough reason, is to help herself. And then understanding of self, she can justify it because she might not get caught, so no harm, no foul kind of thing.
Okay.
Not sure if we did it right, but.
No, I mean, it's okay, and I know it's a little challenging, but we'll wait.
Okay, so basically we thought that Emily can, from a postmodernism perspective, might not have, there's no definition of truth, right? But
Right.
there's nothing to say what is right, what is wrong. I can do anything, I define my own truth.
Absolutely.
I can blame, she can also say that, hey, teacher left it there, then it's meant for me to do it. I define that. She's not gonna look for consequences of an action because she can easily justify it herself. Well, if I'm defining truth, then I can define the consequences. Whoever doesn't like it doesn't have to like it.
Right, right. That's great. Thank you. Yeah, so, the idea is there is no absolute, and one of the things, and maybe I should have touched on it a bit more, is, postmodernists don't believe in this institutional, there's no body that's going to tell you what's right or wrong. So one of the points is, well, like, who are they to put pressure on me to write this exam? This exam doesn't tell me how smart I am, or this exam doesn't really determine whether or not I deserve to get into this. So if I can get by, why not? They're not the absolute people who tell me that I'm worthy to pass this exam or get into this program that I want. So it's the idea is there's a backlash against the institution or against some authority that's telling me the way I ought to be, the way I ought to act, and so on and so forth. I know it's a little challenging, but just something to wrap your brains about. All right. So just a little conclusion here for this case study. It reflects the complex ethical decisions that students may encounter, highlighting the interplay between personal values, religious beliefs, and societal pressures. Emily's decision will not only shape her academic integrity, but also contribute to her character development and the ethical principles in her future endeavors. All right, so this article here, and Mina will be sharing the article with you guys shortly, was in the Globe and Mail about 2 years ago, and it's a topic that's very widely known, that's very widely controversial and being debated as we speak right now. So I would like you guys, again, in your groups, you're going to read the article together, and this is going to be a bit more structured here. After you read the article, you're going to discuss in small groups how the three main postmodern influences of secularism, spirituality, and selfism are reflected in this article. And I could go back to those definitions if you want. I think the middle group, you guys know where that section is in the text. Go back to that section, basically to kind of review how that article reflects these things, and talk about the three main elements of postmodernism: truth, culture, and language are reflected. So this is a real life article with real life implications of postmodern thought. So again, the first one is talk about secularism, spirituality, selfism. And then the second question is truth, culture, and language, how postmodernism is reflected in that article, after you guys read it together. Alrighty. So how can so you'll share, they have access to the article now somehow?
God the equation at all. It's all about like what's right. There's no absolute truth to what is right. It's just based on what they think feels right, right? And the understanding of God, there, one thing we mention is like God tells us to bear parents because we bear parents, our lives on earth will be prolonged, we'll have pleasant days. They don't care about that. They don't see that. They see parents as the enemy in this case. Like, you know, if we follow our parents, actually, if we completely opposite, we'll be miserable and we're putting us in danger. They can actually take our lives. That's pretty much the article is saying.
Yes.
They're a huge danger to our mental and physical well-being, and even like it could even be life-threatening. Yes, I know. Especially it's hard with me. Like
When you word it that way, it sounds pretty ludicrous, doesn't it?
it does sound ludicrous, I know. And then understanding of self. What is self? Yes, you can ask these people. You can ask these people, what is a woman? They won't be able to tell you. What is a man? They don't know what to have. There's so many actual like reels on social media. People approaching random people in the street. What is a woman? I don't know. What is a man? I don't know. You know, so it's lost its meaning. So like they're so confused about what a man or woman even is. So like so for them being a man or woman means acting in a certain way or dressing in a certain way, taking on certain roles, as in the actual meaning of what man or woman is, it's lost. So that digs into truth, culture, and language. The truth is gone, it's diminished. The relative truth is no absolute truth. Truth is just what you make it out to be. And the culture is what defines truth for us. This culture taught us that I can be anything, I can be a giraffe or a hippo if I want to be, and people will accept it. There are stories, horror stories of a child, for example, identifying as a cat, meowing, the teacher gets upset, saying, stop that, you're a human being, she gets fired. Okay, so it's ludicrous. But yeah, that's based on truth and culture and language. Again, it's like there's no absolute definition to anything. It's what you make it out to be. It's whatever feels right. It's whatever you see the truth to be. So we're living in a very mixed up, convoluted society where two things that completely contradict each other could both be right. It could be a man with sight and a blind man entering the room with the light bulb is on. And if the blind man says it's dark and the man who has sight says it's light, they say they're both right, which makes even though the light is obviously on. So yeah, that's just something, you know.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Oh, boy.
We're gonna adopt postmodernism in evaluating you, so whatever answer you say is right. How's that? Not just joking.
Like, that is the approach, like I myself am a teacher and that's kind of the approach that I have to take at school, right? Because it's kind of just a result of we live in a world where after modernism, at least now we accept religion or at least now we accept all forms of education or whatever, right? So we have to be accepting to everything, unfortunately. So this article, I guess, it was very confusing to read because it goes back and forth constantly. So this idea of having you know, like I remember when this issue came out and myself as a teacher, I'm like, what am I supposed to say if a student comes up to me and says I identify as whatever? my first instinct is I have a legal obligation to the parents because these
Mhm.
kids are not 18 yet, right? So it was very hard to like listen to them tell me this stuff and then me not being able to say anything. So and the idea of it for secularism is that the government is trying to stop the community, but then when they push back, the government just kind of gave in, right? So the government is postmodernistic because they believe in the postmodern society. And like I wrote the irony of it, I suppose, if that makes sense.
So they're basically
Okay. So that was secularism, and then spirituality. We kind of said the whole article kind of presents the issue that arrives when we remove spirituality from our today life and government. Like it lacks spirituality completely. And for selfism, we said that people are thinking in a selfish way on like how do I express myself when there's no truth, right? They're defining their own truth because there's no meaning to life, right? They feel lost. So that's how they find meaning in life in such communities like the LGBTQ communities. Um, and then for the three postmodernism, for the truth, we said everyone has their own truth, like we said before, and so each child has the right to be whoever they are without getting consent from their parents. Like as long as they know, like, this is what I am, this is the truth that I believe in. So I don't need to like take someone else's opinion about it. And culture is just well, the culture that you grow up in, like for example, as Christians, when we grow up in our culture as Christians, like we grow up understanding that there is an absolute truth, there's God, and there's always a truth that we can look to when we're not sure like what to do in life, like what are the right decisions. So when you're growing up in the opposite culture of that, of course, so there's no truth, and that's how it contributes to it. And language, we said that when you just use any labels that you can evolve anyway just to identify yourself, right? Like you can, like the first group said, like you can identify the word woman, you can define the word woman however you want, and it can evolve through time to kind of make it apply to you better. So,
You know, I find it interesting that probably when I heard at the beginning mentioned language, didn't seem like a big deal. But really, the whole article is based on language, is based on how to address somebody, right? That's one of that's the beginning issue, and then it goes down to all the other issues. Okay, so the main premise here is God created us as we are. So the minute we defy that, everything else, the minute we don't acknowledge that, everything else breaks down. So we see how that infiltrates everything. So God created us as male, God created us as female. That was God's providence over us. And so, when we talk about the influence of secularism, well, when we take God out of the equation, then you could change whoever you are. You could be whoever you are. When you talk about spirituality, well, your relationship with God and how you view God is not sovereign over your body. God doesn't have any, power or grace or direction over who you become. Therefore, you could become whoever you want, right? Because you don't have a relationship with God. And well, the way I look at myself, it's not how God created me, it's whatever I choose to do, right? The way God created me has no impact on how I view myself. I'm going to view myself however I choose to be. And when we go to the second point, the three elements, truth, again, if God did not mean arbiter of truth, then where do we get our truth? Culture is how we relate to others. So they're trying to create a different culture. They're trying to change culture. And finally, like I mentioned earlier, language. The whole article is based on language, what you call yourself. So this is how postmodernism can affect language. And we could see even language, when you break down that one simple thing, how it can lead to a cascade of other events. And that's all I have to say. Any questions, guys, before we head out? Go ahead.
So there's this very strange movement of people in Europe where they literally live as people's pets, like dress as dogs, and they crawl around all fours in public, and they act like dogs. They even have other people act like it's a disturbing thing. We're seeing like this world is like actually trans, like it's so ridiculous.
No, it's the postmodern thought, according to the text, kind of started in the 1960s, and you can see slowly where we are now and what that thought process has led to, right? All right, guys, thank you so much, and I'll see you next week. Thank you. Thank you, sir. بس الوقت يعني
هو ده يعني فاضل لك دقيقتين.